Why high debt-to-GDP ratios hit African nations harder than developed countries. Developed nations can manage high debt-to-GDP ratios due to stable institutions, strong currencies, and diverse economies. The impact of high debt-to-GDP ratios varies significantly between developed and African countries due to key economic, structural, and financial factors. This difference is rooted in how these nations manage and sustain their debt levels, influenced by their unique economic landscapes and institutional frameworks. Developed nations, like the United States and Canada, often benefit from stable institutions, strong currencies, diverse economies, and favorable borrowing conditions. These factors collectively make high debt levels more manageable for them. For instance, the debt-to-GDP ratio in the United States stands at 124.1%, while in Canada it is 103.2%. Despite these high ratios, these countries can maintain economic stability and growth due to their robust financial systems and the confidence of international investors in their economies. The African debt dilemma. In contrast, African countries face a myriad of challenges that make even moderate debt levels more burdensome. Higher borrowing costs, economic vulnerabilities, and governance challenges are some of the critical issues that exacerbate the impact of debt in these nations. For example, the debt-to-GDP ratio in Sudan is a staggering 237.10%, while in Cape Verde, it is 107.20%. These high ratios raise concerns about economic stability and growth potential in these countries. One of the primary reasons for the higher borrowing costs in African countries is the perceived risk associated with lending to these nations. Investors demand higher interest rates to compensate for the increased risk, which in turn raises the cost of borrowing for these countries. This situation is further compounded by economic vulnerabilities such as dependence on commodity exports, which are subject to volatile global prices, and limited economic diversification. Governance challenges also play a significant role in the debt dynamics of African countries. Issues such as corruption, political instability, and weak institutional frameworks hinder effective debt management and economic development. These challenges often lead to inefficient use of borrowed funds, further exacerbating the debt burden. In addition to these factors, African countries also face structural challenges that impede their ability to manage debt effectively. Rapid population growth intensifies the demand for essential services such as education, healthcare, and infrastructure. However, the pace of economic growth often lags behind these critical needs, compelling governments to rely heavily on borrowing to address immediate challenges. This reliance on borrowing can lead to unsustainable debt levels, as seen in many African nations. In contrast, developed nations have the advantage of diverse economies that can absorb and manage debt more effectively. Their economies are not as heavily reliant on a single sector, reducing their vulnerability to external shocks. Moreover, strong institutional frameworks and governance structures in developed nations ensure that borrowed funds are used efficiently and effectively, contributing to economic growth and stability. The comparison between developed and African countries highlights the stark differences in their capacities to manage high debt-to-GDP ratios. While developed nations can leverage their stable institutions, strong currencies, and diverse economies to sustain high debt levels, African countries struggle with higher borrowing costs, economic vulnerabilities, and governance challenges that make even moderate debt levels more burdensome. Addressing these challenges is crucial for African countries to achieve sustainable economic growth and stability in the long term.